Okay, so we should be live now. Just confirming things. Okay. Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy. Okay. Sharing my camera. Well, hello there. It is 9:26 a.m. today, March 19th, Tuesday. So this is actually my second take. My first take, I was streaming for about 8 minutes and I realized I never showed my screen as I was talking. So this is take two. And today we are going to be talking about uh, the Popper. We're going to be talking about Popper.js, Pop, Popovers and Tooltips within HSDS React. Um, so these are the components here. The Oh boy, how embarrassing! Yeah, I mean, just streaming 8 minutes without realizing I wasn't sharing my screen. This is take two. So this is the tooltip component here. It's really nice. You can click and do whatever, and it pops up. And with knobs, we're able to control certain things about the tooltip. So for example, the animation duration. So now it'll take 1 second for it to complete its animation cycle. Like that, you can see it takes 1 second for it to kind of reveal up. There's delays, and you can also change the location of the tooltip, which is quite nice, like so. And here is Popover. There we go. Popovers and tooltips, they are basically identical in terms of the rendering mechanisms that go on underneath. But in terms of what the components are, I forgot to share my screen again, except this time I caught it a little bit earlier, so excuse me. There we go. Now I'm gonna, oh boy, what a day. So let's give a brief demo. Okay, here's Popover. And I'm able to, sorry, here's the tooltip. I'm able to change the direction. It can render into various directions, which is nice. I think I'm just going to start my stream with just me and my desktop and my camera from now on, instead of just focusing on myself in the beginning. I always forgetting to change the camera to show my screen. That's a big risk. I'm not going to take that again. All right, you learn things as you do things, I suppose. So yeah, so this is the tooltip within HSDS React. You can change the directions of them, which is really nice. You can change the animation duration, so it takes a little bit longer to pop up, like I mentioned. And here we have Popover. I mean, it looks almost identical, except popovers are white instead of black by default. Not black, dark blue, but um, there's a little bit more to it than that. Um, in terms of how these components behave, from a UI standpoint, they're a little bit different. So popover tooltips, you don't really engage with them. They're kind of triggered based on typically like a bit of text or like an icon, maybe like an icon with an eye for information or something like that. And yeah, they're designed to give you additional context without action. So typically, as soon as you mouse into them, they will kind of disappear. They kind of serve as an enhanced version of the HTML title attribute. So I don't know if I have anything with the title in there, but let me see. Nothing's showing. But you know when you hover over like a link or something, or an image, and then you'll see like this little yellow box that pops up? That's the HTML title attribute. That's basically the default browser tooltip. And these tooltips, this little fella right here, is just like an enhanced version with fancy animations and so on. Popovers are different. Popovers, typically, they are designed for user actions. So they might contain a button inside, or multiple buttons, links, additional context, like images or headings or headers. So we have a header right here. Hello. If I can type. It's a little bit laggy within Storybook if you want to engage with typing and knobs and rendering and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so yeah, popovers are designed for engagement. So the triggering mechanism is different. So typically popovers, you would engage with them from a click because it's more user engaged. So I click on something, the popover comes up, and now I engage with a popover. Tooltips, they typically render via hover. So here I have a trigger on, knob that I can change so that depending on how I engage with the initial trigger, and that's this tooltip trigger text, it'll show, and once I mouse out of it, it'll hide. Popovers are interesting because if I change this to hover, they share the same API, and I'll get into how that is later on. So once I hover over this guy, it doesn't go away. It only goes away if I press escape or if I do this. If I move into it, because now I'm engaging with the popover, and now I move out of it because I'm done engaging with the popover. So there's a little extra mechanism in there that handles it. So underneath the hood, both Popover and Tooltip use a library called Popper.js. Popper.js has become basically the standard way of how you're supposed to do these things on the internet because it does a lot of fancy math in order to calculate the placement of where these UIs need to be in relation to the original trigger point. So it doesn't actually render this, this little flipping popper right here. It doesn't render that UI. It's responsible for figuring out how to position it. So here, as soon as it's close to the bottom, it'll flip to the top. As soon as it's close to the top, it'll flip, or as soon as there's room for it to show in the bottom, it'll flip to the bottom because the bottom is the optimal position for it. And if there's room on the left, it'll go to the left because the desired position is on the left. So there's a lot of fancy math going on in here in order to figure all this kind of stuff out. And here's the other cool thing. In addition to the square being directionally aware, the triangle on the inside, this little arrow guy, it's also aware of its surroundings. So as soon as I move this guy to the edge, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. And the square touches the left edge right there. And as I keep moving it, you'll see the triangle move. That's because this library is aware of the triggering XY. That's this drag me box. It's aware of the distance between here, this edge, X, and the Y. It's a, whoa, uh-oh, zoom out. I'm not used to the zooming in thing. It's aware of the distance between the box XY and also the triangle XY within the box. So as soon as the flipping popover yellow box touches that, the triangle will move along with the original triggering mechanism because it's trying to position itself in the best position possible based on this current render. And every single time I move, it'll like recalculate, re-render, and it'll adjust the position slightly. And as soon as the triangle touches the edge, it'll stay there because it doesn't make sense for the triangle or the arrow to continually move along the top edge of the square. And once the triangle touches the end or reaches the end of the original trigger point, the library realizes, okay, the thing you're trying to drag is obviously going out of the box. I'm just going to follow you. And that's what it does. And as soon as you bring it back into the containing box, it'll do basically the inverse of that, and it'll go back to its original position. This is a very, very clever, fantastic, and also kind of pretty tiny library that's awesome. And I know how complex this stuff is because prior to using Popper, I built my own. And I never want to do that again because it's nuts. The amount of things that you have to think about, it's nuts. And the fact that someone has built it for us, I'm very grateful, by the way. Yeah, we'll just use that because it's become the standard way of doing things. So standard that Bootstrap has started using Popper.js within Bootstrap 4. So Popper.js alongside of jQuery are now dependencies for Bootstrap right here. So you have the Bootstrap.js, you have the Popper, and then you have the jQuery. And that Bootstrap uses Popper.js for its tooltip and popover mechanisms. So for React, we have a library called React Popper. React Popper was created by the same person who invented Popper.js. He is right here. Same guy. Whoa, this guy also made Bootstrap material design. This guy's nuts. Anyway, so yeah, this is basically gives you a React component API in order for you to interface with the Popper.js library. However, there is a downside to this, and that is it doesn't support React 16 out of the box, because this library uses fragments, which is a new API within React 16. And we are currently on, as of today, we're currently on React 15. However, we've been using Tooltips for a while, and also we're starting to use Popovers as well. So in order for me to enable this to happen, I basically forked React Popper into HSDS React as a component that's available within the components directory right about here. Yes, it's a typo here. But we have all the main components that you would get from React Popper: manager, Popper, reference here, and slightly tweaked to make it React 15 compatible. In other words, I replaced fragment with something else. And I think that was it. They use Flow for their typing system, which is great. They have something. But we've since switched over to TypeScript, and for now, I think I'm just going to leave this alone. Even though the conversion would probably be quite simple, I'm just going to leave it alone because I want to keep this as close to the original React Popper as possible. And once we upgrade to React 16, we'll see if we can just use that one directly, rather than us having to manage this forked version. Anyway, so we have Popper within HSDS React. In addition to, I'm going to be saying the word pop a lot, so I apologize. So in addition to Popper, we also have something called Pop. Pop is a custom component I wrote that basically makes using React Popper simpler, because this provides you with not his GitHub profile. This provides you with very low-level things here, but you still have to do quite a bit of setup work in order to get this working. And also, there's no portaling mechanism built into here, although they tell you how you can do it. Like that, right? So you'd have to create your own portal and so on. So all this kind of scaffoldy setup work has been done within the pop mechanism, the pop component right here. Let's see if I jump into code. Maybe it's a little bit easier to see. Make this bigger. Yeah. Pop. Pop, pop, pop. Oh boy. So I can tell the age of this guy. It's not that bad because there's flow in there, but it's a little bad because here I'm still using this children map mechanism thing. And we have since started using, instead of doing children map, we've since started doing prop provider plus prop connect in order for us to enhance child components without having to map over them. Anyway, this is what we got so far. Didn't need to refactor it for now. So we have the manager. This one's really important. This one comes from Popper Manager. And what does Popper Manager do? Again, this is React Popper. So what Popper Manager does is it's basically you can think of it like the Redux store that communicates between the Popper and the reference. Okay. The reference is basically nope, that is Slack. The reference is basically this, not the arrow, this original trigger mechanism. It needs to know what that is. Oh wait, this is a better example. This drag me box, that is the reference. It needs to know what that is in order to make calculations against it. So it needs to store that DOM element within state somehow to make continuous calculations. And then we have the Popper. component. The popper component is this box. So we have the two main components right now. We have the reference, which is the origin, and then we have the popper, which is the actual UI that you want to render. And the manager manages both of those because how that works is once the reference renders into the UI, where did it go? Reference, yes. So basically how it works is once the reference renders into the UI, this is very difficult to understand. And again, this is their implementation of it here. This library, I didn't build it, but I'm gonna write pseudocode. So we have the manager. Hide that for now. We have, oh my goodness, not minimize. Geez. So we have the manager, and then we have the manager renders two things. We have the reference and the popper. So once it renders, it gets the reference, which is the DOM node, which is probably I don't know, it's an HTML element, most likely it's a div. So it gets this reference, and then it fires a callback that the manager has provided it. So now this reference, again, this is the HTML element, it goes to the manager, and then the manager stores HTML element into state, and then the manager passes that HTML element into Popper via context. That's how the manager communicates between the reference and the Popper. They use context to communicate between them, which is nice. And then once Popper knows the origin, which is this HTML element here, Popper then instantiates Popper.js, the library, with the HTML element, because the underlying Popper.js library, because this React Popper thing is still using it, you need to give it a reference element and whatever options you want in order for it to do its magic. So, but this is a minimum requirement. You need the HTML element. So that's how this cycle works. The Popper doesn't render anything at first. Reference renders. Reference gets the HTML element, the original origin, passes it to manager. Manager updates a thing, updates context. Context trickles down, updates Popper. Popper instantiates Popper.js with the HTML element, and now we have our mathematical calculations. And that instance of Popper.js, which is here, this new Popper thing, var Popper, it's stored as internal, I believe it's an instance variable within the React Popper component instance. Hopefully this makes sense. Again, I'm going to be saying pop a lot just because of how these things are named. So yeah, that is the relationship between the manager, the reference, and also popper. Now, jumping back to pop. Pop provides a very nice API to kind of deal with all that stuff, so you don't have to think about it, which is great. Because, man, setting up all that stuff, even though it's easy, because they've done a lot of hard work for you, it's still quite a bit of work. And this has also been enhanced by other things. So here we have this event listener. Oh, I did a handy stream yesterday about event listeners and key press listeners within HSDS React. But it's listening for the event that's been fired when you click on, what I click on? Body click. When you click on the body, because for tooltips and popovers, I provided the components with the ability to close when you click on the body, which is the typical behavior. So here, if I click on the body, the popover should close. However, there's a way, because I have control over that. There's a way to disable or manually adjust that. So now, regardless of however times I'm clicking on the body, nothing happens because I've disabled that rule. Now it'll be able to close. Great. So that's what that is. Content click. Ah, yes. So this is an enhancement that Brett suggested when we were developing Popover. Popover is quite a recent addition to HSDS React. So when we were developing that, he wanted a way where if you were to click within the content here, the word hello also close the popover. So we have a mechanism for that. Escape, I talked a little bit about escape handling. This has been removed from that refactor, by the way, so this is no longer really relevant. This one is interesting. So remember that mechanism I showed where if you happen to trigger the popover with hover, I'm gonna zoom in. Okay. So once I hover my mouse over the reference point, the popover will show. But if I mouse away from the reference point, the popover stays. As soon as I mouse into the popover, it still stays. But once I'm here and then I mouse out, like so, it'll close. So that's what that mechanism does. It keeps track of that in order to handle that guy. So we have some handy dandy callbacks here. So when you're building components and your component has lifecycle things like open, close, load, unload, all that kind of stuff, it's nice to provide the user with some kind of before mechanism so they're able to do work before the actual opening happens. You see this with a lot of libraries like Bootstrap, for example. They have their on show, on shown, or whatever within their modals. It's a convention that's existed for a while. So with Popper, or Popover rather, you have on open and you have on before open. So how you would handle the both of these are functions. So if you were to build something like on before open, I recommend you make this a promise. So you can do something like do a thing const do a thing. So this is a function that has to return a promise. So return new promise reject resolve reject something like that. Yes. So you like here is great because now you do a thing like you update your state and then you resolve it, and that allows you to open your popover. After the fact, you want to make a fetch to an API so that you load some data before rendering, things like that. This gives you the additional flexibility to do that by interfacing with the component directly, rather than you having to fiddle with stuff within your parent component or Redux state or something like that. So this is a really nice way of doing it. I need to add this mechanism to more things like modals and things. But anyway, this is a good starting point. So the default props here, this is very good, by the way. I advocate for having lots of default props wherever possible. Is just a promise that resolves itself. So instantaneous, it's resolved, it's fine. So once that's resolved, then set the state to open. That allows the popover to or the tooltip to open. And once that is done, then trigger the on open callback. So I talked a little bit about this before in a previous stream, but I'm going to talk about this again. So React's set state mechanism. If you were to do something like this set state thing, this props on open. Right. So if I were to write something like this, there's no guarantee that this will fire immediately after this. This one is an asynchronous function. So in order for you to do something, After this has been done, React gives you a secondary argument for set state. And that is basically a function that you can execute. So if you do something like this, you'll set the state. Once that's done, once that operation has been completed, then you do the onOpen callback, and all should be good. And onClose is basically the exact same thing, but it takes care of the closing mechanism. Ooh, this is a handy trick I like to keep things clean. So if you need to do something where you need to toggle open and close, or you need to toggle certain things, instead of adding logic that looks like this as part of another method or another function or another callback, just create another method called toggle open or toggle whatever it is, and that's all it does. So here at this point, you can just call it, and it'll be way cleaner throughout wherever it is you need to use it. And that's basically it for this pop mechanism. Oh boy, getting into the weeds a little bit here. So Popper. Okay. To clarify, where are we? We are within the we are within the pop component directory, and pop has arrow, has manager. Manager is just basically React Popper manager, and pop also has reference, which is the same thing there, React Popper reference. But pop also has popper inside, because that's just how it works. So now we have two pops, popper. So what this guy does is it renders the UI that you want, that is this popover component here, or the tooltip, within a portal. This has been refactored as of a couple of days ago to properly handle the escape stack. I did another video about that. You can check that out if you want to. If you want to spend like half an hour looking at nested recursive inception level handling of React things. Yeah, so this renders the component that you want within the React Popper. You're able to give it some options that gets passed through. So modifiers, the placement, wherever it is you want, whether you want position to be fixed or absolute. There are some defaults up here, like so. So by default, it doesn't use position fixed. There are times, I think, where you might want position fixed. It depends on the kind of UIs that you render and how you render your elements. But for us, we don't use position fixed. It animates the component in. We have another mechanism here. This guy is the one that controls the mouse leave mechanism for this guy. So as soon as I mouse leave, it closes. That's what this guy does. It just controls that mechanism. It renders the actual thing finally, which is this box, and it also renders the arrow. The arrow is special because, as I've demoed here, as I zoom in, the arrow, whoops, dragged the wrong thing. The arrow needs to follow the reference as the UI moves around. Dragging is a very extreme case because there's not a lot of UIs, at least not for us, where you need a popover that follows a draggable element that moves around. But there are cases where the element or the original reference might shift to the right-hand side as additional fields get added or something. So the arrow and also the entire popover thing in general needs to be aware of that. So this one's a little bit complicated because Popper, so this ref thing, this is the thing I was talking about, where it's a function that basically gets the HTML element, passes it to the manager. Popper gives you a bunch of inline style attributes that tell the element how to position itself. I'm just going to change this to click. So once I open this, okay, inspect element on that guy. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, lots of elements here. So these guys, this transform, translate, whatever, all this funky stuff, that comes from Popper.js. It's using the calculation of the original reference, the XY, and also the XY of the box, mathing it, and then giving you the translate 3D math for it. And also some other things. I've added a function called enhanced popper styles here that basically take the style and some other things that you give this particular component and make some adjustments specifically for our needs. So we just basically need to adjust the distance essentially of this box and the trigger point to make it a little bit nicer. Because by default, the popover mechanism, the popover UI, is touching basically the original reference point, which is good for demos like this. But for UIs that we want to render, we need some space. So that's what this function does. It basically gives it some space depending on the placement it is. So it'll give it some additional top or give it some additional left. And that's what this does. It just enhances it with that. And then the styles get rendered out, and that's what you see here. Like so, all these guys. And there's another argument property. There's another property within the render prop argument that Popper gives you called arrow props. And what these are yes, this ref thing again. So the manager also needs to be aware of the HTML element of your arrow in addition to the original reference element. So it needs to know that. So once the arrow renders, it'll fire this callback. This callback will then send the arrow HTML element to the manager, context down, and now Popper knows how to do some stuff. This plus the arrow props style renders the placement and the inline styles for the arrow. That's how the arrow is able to move. So we can see right here the arrow has a left of 65. As I move it around, you'll see that arrow changes its left position. Like so. And that's how Popper is able to dynamically change the position of both the UI itself, the box, the square, and also the arrow at the same time, kind of independently, depending on whatever that's required. So yeah, all this scaffoldy setup stuff has been done with this lower level component within HSDS called Pop. Just gonna quit out of all of these guys here. And the arrow component within Pop, it doesn't really do anything much. It's just responsible for rendering the UI. So most of it actually comes from just styles. So that's the thing that needs to generate the arrow. Oh, that's actually quite interesting. So there's several techniques of generating triangles within the front end world. Of course, you need to. I'm going to lower my camera a bit. Of course, you need to use CSS to do it. But I think the go-to solution would be CSS triangles. Yeah, CSS tricks from 2009. Wow, that's 10 years ago. So the go-to solution before was to use borders to shape it. So you basically have a giant border on two sides and transparent borders. No, a giant border on one side and a transparent border on all the other sides. And that's how you're able to get a triangle. And then depending on which side you put the border on, you can make the triangle render on the bottom, top, and so on. This is fine, but it makes the calculation of the arrow thing a little bit tricky to work with Popper. So what I did, and this technique was actually borrowed from one of Buzz's code pens, which is great. Buzz, he's an awesome designer. His code pens are fantastic, and even though a lot of the code he uses in his code pens can't be copied and pasted into production directly, and he has admitted this, I really appreciate them because the idea of how they should be constructed from like a interaction and UI standpoint is solid. So I was able to borrow this from his code pen. So what this is, so what you're seeing, this triangle here, if you can imagine, it's basically a square, a rendered out square, rotated 90 degrees. Now you have a diamond. And now if you were to cut off the top of the diamond by shifting it a bit or hiding it behind the box, like so, if you were to move it up, this top part now becomes invisible. So now you just have the bottom of the diamond, and what is the bottom of a diamond? It is a triangle. Yeah, this is a much better illustration. Yeah, so now you have a triangle. This one is particularly tricky. So in order for me to render a diamond with a border, in addition to mesh with the containing poppy bubble looking thing, is I essentially have two diamonds. One matches the color of the popover, which is white. One matches the color of the border, which is some sort of gray. And then there is a 1 pixel shift so that the white diamond is up by 1 pixel in order for you to see the gray diamond in the back. And that gives you the illusion that the box and the diamond are one cohesive thing. And that's basically how it works. And I believe the diamond mechanisms, they are aware of the size of the border. So I think if you were to change the border size, the diamond will shift accordingly, something like that. So that it allows for this UI to render very seamlessly, which is nice. And it's tricky because if you were to move this guy to like the right or the left side, now the diamond can't really shift from the bottom. It has to shift from some other side in order to accommodate the location of your popover mechanism. Yeah, so that's a little bit complicated. But again, all of that has been abstracted from you when you use pop. So now, when we take a look at Tooltip, Tooltip is very simple. Okay? All it does is it uses reference that comes from pop. Reference is basically how you use Tooltip is, this is how you, dang it. How you use Tooltip is this. You have a Tooltip component, and you have something that renders inside. Hover over me, please. So you have a DOM element that says hover over me, plus, and then the thing to show within the tooltip, like so, that hello text, that's basically a title. So this is how you use Tooltip, the Tooltip component within HSDS. And here's how it works under the hood. It uses pop reference to render your child. It's always funny within JavaScript and React when you have to say render children. So it renders your child. And here it renders the popper. What does that do? All it does is that it renders the popper, which isn't much. It's just like literally this. It just renders a UI that colors it like dark gray with some white text. That's all it does with your content. And that's it. All the super complicated stuff that went into of a manager and context state and being passed around and math and all that kind of stuff. It's been abstracted from you. All you have to do is just use a reference and a popper, pass some stuff inside, and it'll render accordingly. It'll be directionally aware. It'll have closing mechanisms. It'll do all that kind of stuff for you. And this was by design, so that you can build interfaces like tooltips with very minimal code. All this really cares about is like custom tailoring that experience slightly, by having some defaults like the animation delays or the arrow size, for example, and maybe like close on mouse leave, things like that, and rendering the UI that's specific to this component. In this case, it's just having a dark box with a dark triangle and white text. And now that we've brought in Popper.js, now that we forked React Popper and created a better interface for it called Pop, and have constructed Tooltip based on that, we're going to level 5, which is Popover. And all Popover is it is an enhanced tooltip. And that's it. So with these 4 levels, of Popper.js, forked React Popper, Pop interface, tooltip, we're able to construct Popover very, very simply. All we're doing is we are adjusting the content a bit, depending on if you've added a title or a header and so on, and change the color of what we want the tooltip to be, in this case white, and added some CSS, which isn't much. When we want the content to be white, when we want the border to be a certain size, and so on, and passed all that through to Tooltip. Tooltip will then do its thing to render Popper and all that kind of stuff. And now we have 2 very robust, very complete interfaces, for tooltips and popovers. And that's how all this kind of stuff works, which is intense. Not as intense as dropdowns, I must say. That is probably like a 3-part stream or something. Dropdowns, oh my goodness. But yeah, this was quite intense. I've said this to many people. The most complicated things that you can build within a UI component library things are modals, dropdowns, tooltips, and popovers. In terms of those, modals are the easiest. Even if you count recursive modals that are nested, that also need to be route aware. So we have some here. Where is it? Routes. So here the modal appears when you visit a certain route. And then here we have a bunch of routes that trigger a bunch of different modals depending on certain situations. And then modals can be recursively nested, that can be recursively opened. This is very complicated mechanisms here, but that is nothing compared to the tooltip popover mechanisms that's required to render things, position things, and so on. And then the tooltip popover mechanisms are absolutely nothing compared to drop-down mechanisms. So one last thing, and that is, how on earth is Popper recalculating the position and sizing of all this stuff? How does it do it? Because throughout the code that I've shown, and also throughout this API here, you don't see any kind of callback hook to re-render or reposition itself or something like that. So typically, if you wanted to set something like this up, where you had a draggable interface and something else that you want to render, you have something that looks like this. You have like draggable guy. You have a draggable guy here, and then you have a popover gal right here. Yep, and then both of them need to kind of work together. So here you would do something like on drag, update position, and then let's pretend that fire is like a method or something somewhere. So every pixel you drag, draggable guy, it'll update some state somewhere, and then it'll reposition drag pop over gal. And that's how these two kind of communicate. But there's none of that going on in here. So how does it do it? I can take a guess. I haven't checked, but let me just take a stab at it. My guess is that it's using some sort of request animation frame loop to do it. Schedule update. Yeah. So there's an update cycle that happens within Popper.js. And basically, every 16.6 milliseconds, there's a recalculation that happens. It happens, it's like a loop. It's an animation loop. And every single animation loop, it does a recalculation of the reference versus the body, and that's how it's able to reposition itself dynamically without callbacks as a UI updates, which is really nice. It's a really nice. I really like this pattern because one less thing for the person implementing this stuff to think about. So I think if I were to performance profile this guy, no, this is a better example here. So if I were to do it here, or just to wait just a little bit, my guess would be you would see lots of little green ticks because it's, huh, that's surprising. The heck? I'm gonna move this guy up and down. How does their scheduler work? Wow. Again, I'm just taking wild guesses as to how this stuff works. But typically that's kind of how it would work. Hmm. I think they might have optimized something here, but basically, yeah, you would have a scheduling or loop animation loop kind of mechanism in order for it to recalculate magically for itself, and that's how you're able to get that. So hopefully this was helpful. A very in-depth dive into how Popper.js, React Popper, Pop, Tooltip, and Popover works within the realm of HSDS. And I am very thankful that these components are coded because now we just use it and we don't ever have to think about this stuff again, which is a load off my mind. So hopefully this was helpful. You have been wonderful. I've been Q, and hope you have a fantastic day. Catch you later. Bye.